Some things are supposed to explode. Fireworks, volcanoes, Michael Bay movies. But this isn't about them. This is about the other things, the ordinary things, the ones that quietly exist until they violently don't. So grab your favorite beverage and stay tuned, because this might be important. Our story begins in Minneapolis, 1878, a city powered by water, wheat, and dangerously bad assumptions about physics. At the time, Minneapolis was the flour capital of the world. Dozens of grain mills lined the Mississippi River, churning out hundreds of barrels of flour a day. Among them, one stood above the rest. It was a monument to industrial ambition, 7 stories tall, newly built, and it produced over 2,000 barrels of flour every 24 hours. But there was one small problem: flour dust. You see, when wheat is ground down into flour, it creates an ultra-fine powder. That powder drifts into the air and coats every surface. It hangs there, unseen, weightless, and waiting. In high enough concentrations, flour dust is explosive, not flammable. Explosive. It only takes one spark to ignite a dust cloud, and when it does, the result is what chemists call a dust explosion, and what laypeople call a bad time. On the night of May 2nd, 1878, something inside the mill sparked, likely a metal gear grinding against stone. That spark ignited the dust. The explosion was instant and catastrophic. The Washburn mill was obliterated. 18 workers were killed instantly. 5 neighboring mills were damaged or destroyed, and parts of Minneapolis shook as if the earth itself had sneezed. Investigators quickly realized what had happened, and in a surprising turn for 19th century industry, they actually decided to fix it. When the mill was rebuilt 2 years later, it included ventilation systems, dust collectors, and fireproofing measures. These safety changes became industry standards, eventually adopted across the world. So yes, flour is dangerous. But in a weird way, the explosion of the Washburn mill actually helped prevent thousands of future deaths, which is more than can be said for most things that explode in this video. After the dust settled in Minneapolis, the world moved on. But by the early 20th century, a new threat had emerged, this time from a place known more for sheep than shrapnel: New Zealand. The year was 1931. Farmers across New Zealand were locked in a battle against a plant called ragwort, a bright yellow weed that looks like sunshine and behaves like a curse. It chokes out pasture grass, poisons livestock, and generally makes life annoying for anyone trying to raise sheep. The government, eager for solutions, promoted the use of a chemical called sodium chlorate. It was cheap, it was effective, but it had only one tiny side effect: it turned your pants into literal explosives. Sodium chlorate is a powerful oxidizer. That means if it soaks into organic material like grass, cotton, or say the pants of the person spraying it, it creates a volatile mix just waiting for a spark. Sparks like a match, a pipe, or rubbing your leg too fast. Reports soon began to spread. Pants were catching fire. Some farmers ignited while lighting cigarettes. Others burst into flames near open flames, machinery, or nothing at all. One farmer's trousers ignited while he was standing in a field. There was no fire nearby, just bad luck and excellent conductivity. The government, after receiving multiple reports of spontaneous leg combustion, quietly stopped recommending sodium chlorate. Eventually, it was banned altogether, but not before a number of scorched farmers had learned a very personal lesson about chemical safety. To this day, New Zealand remains one of the only countries where pants fire was once a legitimate workplace hazard. While New Zealand was quietly trying not to ignite its farmers, Oregon was preparing for a much louder mistake, one involving dynamite, a beach, and roughly 8 tons of whale meat. The year was 1970. The place, Florence, Oregon. A 45-foot, 8-ton sperm whale had washed ashore. It had been dead for several days, and the smell was becoming unmissable. Local officials were faced with a dilemma. They couldn't move it, they couldn't bury it, and apparently no one thought of calling on local butchers to just cut up the whale. So they did the next best thing. They filled it with dynamite. The plan, according to the highway department, was to use a half-ton of explosives to blast the whale into small pieces that seagulls would then eat. Because when faced with a biohazard, the best solution is always let the birds handle it. The resulting explosion launched large, rotting chunks of whale corpse in every direction. Spectators, journalists, and their cars were showered in rancid meat. One parked vehicle was crushed by a flying slab of whale that weighed over 200 pounds. Footage of the event aired on the evening news. The reporter who covered it later said, "It might be the most wonderful event I've ever witnessed, and the most bizarre. Now, you might think this would be a one-time event, but in 2004, a dead whale in Taiwan exploded again. This time, without help. A 56-foot sperm whale had died and was being transported through the city of Tainan for a necropsy. As it rolled through downtown, internal gases built up, and then, without warning, it ruptured. Meat and entrails sprayed over pedestrians, storefronts, and passing scooters. No one was injured physically. In both cases, the lesson was clear. Whales are not bombs. Until they are. But not every explosion comes from whale carcasses. Sometimes it's entirely intentional and still goes spectacularly wrong. Just ask Bulgaria. Not every explosion is accidental. Sometimes we want something to explode. For justice, for closure, for symbolism, and occasionally for bureaucracy. In 1999, Bulgaria was reckoning with its communist past. 10 years earlier, the regime had collapsed, but one architectural relic still stood in the heart of the capital, the Georgi Dimitrov Mausoleum. For nearly 50 years, this marble-clad tomb had housed the embalmed body of Georgi Dimitrov, Bulgaria's first communist leader and a close ally of Stalin. After his death in 1949, he was buried in a Lenin-style glass coffin, and his mausoleum became the ultimate symbol of the state's Soviet-aligned identity. After the fall of communism, Dimitrov's body was removed, but the mausoleum remained, a hulking, windowless reminder of a regime the country wanted to forget. So, in 1999, Bulgaria's government made a decision. They wouldn't just remove the building, they would demolish it with high-powered explosives for the public to see. It was supposed to be cathartic, but the mausoleum had other plans. On August 21st, a crowd gathered near the mausoleum. Cameras were set. Dignitaries stood by. Demolition teams wired the building with explosives. The countdown began. But after the loud sound of explosions, the mausoleum stood unfazed. So, officials took the next logical step and wired the building with even more explosives. After the second explosion, the building remained unfazed. Time to get even more explosives. On the third try, the building finally collapsed. Not into itself, but awkwardly sideways, into nearby trees, fencing, and heavy machinery. Shockwaves from the third explosion were so powerful that windows within a 10-block radius shattered. No one was hurt. But Bulgaria's attempt at closure had turned into national slapstick. Engineers later admitted that the structure had been exceptionally well built, reinforced with thick concrete and intentionally designed to resist external force. Ironically, the mausoleum was too strong to fall down properly. Like a final act of defiance from the regime it once represented. The past is hard to bury, especially when it's reinforced with Soviet concrete. After Bulgaria struggled to bring down a building on purpose, the rest of the world found a new threat to fear. Something that quietly lives in your pocket. Let's talk about cell phones. In the early 2000s, a peculiar warning started showing up at gas stations around the world. Turn off your mobile phone, usually printed in bold red lettering, sometimes with a cartoon phone mid-explosion, just to be subtle. The logic was simple. Gas stations are full of flammable vapor. Cell phones have batteries. Therefore, boom. Except that wasn't actually true. Despite the fear, there has never been a confirmed incident of a mobile phone causing a gas station explosion. Not in the US, not in Europe. Not even in Florida. But the myth had legs, especially after a few incidents where gas stations did catch fire, just not because of phones. The real culprit in those cases? Static electricity. When you slide across a car seat, then touch a metal nozzle without discharging static, the spark can ignite gas vapors, especially in dry climates. It's rare but real, and because phones were new, visible, and not very well understood at the time, they made an easy scapegoat. Even the Mythbusters team tested it. Their result? Phones didn't ignite gas, but your hoodie might. Still, the myth stuck. Why? Because rules that sound scientific tend to go unquestioned, especially if they're printed in all caps and laminated. Today, most stations no longer enforce the rule, but some still display the warning, more out of habit than science. A kind of fossilized paranoia, preserved in signage. So no, your cell phone isn't a bomb. Our next explosion took place somewhere far more private, somewhere sacred. The bathroom. In 2012, a series of toilet recalls swept across Canada. The problem? Not clogging, not cracking, but exploding. Specifically, the explosions were caused by a device known as the Flushmate 3 Pressure-Assisted Flushing System, an internal tank mechanism designed to blast water into the bowl with greater force than gravity-fed toilets. It was a high-efficiency, high-pressure innovation. What could go wrong? The system used compressed air to create powerful flushes, but in some cases, the plastic welds that held the tank together failed under pressure. When that happened, the tank didn't leak. It didn't crack. It exploded. The explosions could and did launch ceramic shrapnel into the room, damage plumbing, and cause injury. One person reportedly suffered a laceration serious enough to require stitches. Several others were injured, and countless others were startled into permanent trust issues. Over 2.3 million units were recalled. Flushmate urged owners to stop using their toilets immediately, which raised a new problem. Where else were they supposed to go? The company offered free repairs, but the real damage was already done. Not to the plumbing, but to the sacred compact between man and toilet. In the end, the exploding toilet didn't become a national crisis, but for a brief porcelain-shattering moment, every bathroom became a potential war zone. Anyways, if you learned something or just feel slightly less safe around toilets, go ahead and subscribe, and check out this video that the algorithm thinks you'll like. It's probably just as unnecessary, but who knows? This might be important.